Flight attendant insults a black soldier for wearing his uniform not knowing he owns the airline. She told a black soldier he didn't belong in first class because of his uniform. He didn't argue. He simply stood up and made one quiet phone call. Moments later, the captain was notified the crew was frozen in silence, and she found out the man she'd just humiliated was the owner of the entire airline. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And if stories like this move you, subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss what happens next. The morning rush at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport had already reached full speed. Escalators hummed beneath the shuffle of suitcases. Overhead announcements echoed across terminals, each gate a staging ground of organized chaos. Families rechecked tickets. Business travelers stared into coffee cups, and uniformed personnel wove through the current like practiced swimmers. At gate C-19, Marcus Adams stood still in the middle of the movement. He wasn't in a rush. His posture was perfect. Shoulders back, spine straight, chin lifted just slightly. The Air Force dress blues he wore were flawless. Shoes polished metals aligned precisely above his left breast pocket. His carry-on was modest, tucked neatly beneath his arm, and his expression was one of quiet awareness. He had walked through enough airports to know the rhythm of stairs. Some passengers had nodded at him with quiet recognition. One young boy had saluted. Marcus returned it with a brief smile. But most just looked. Some with admiration, some with curiosity, and a few with that too familiar shade of suspicion that never fully went away. He didn't flinch from it. He didn't expect more. He was here to fly, and he had nothing to prove. When the gate attendant called for first-class boarding, Marcus stepped forward. The scanner beeped. The attendant glanced at the boarding pass, then at Marcus, offering a polite, "Thank you for your service, Colonel." Marcus nodded once and continued down the jet bridge. The first-class cabin on Stratus Air Flight 227 was quiet, serene even. Cream leather seats, soft amber lighting, and the faint scent of citrus from the pre-flight towels. A man in a tailored blazer thumbed through the Wall Street Journal. A woman in heels sipped a Bloody Mary with perfect posture. Marcus took seat 2A by the window. He placed his carry-on in the overhead bin, settled into the chair, and fastened his belt. Then he simply sat, hands relaxed on his lap, gaze out the window, eyes on the slowly moving baggage carts below. The cabin doors remained open. Passengers were still boarding. Across the aisle, a flight attendant was working her way through the front rows. Her name tag read Emily Thompson. She wore the Stratus Air uniform well, neatly pressed blouse, navy neck scarf tied precisely, lipstick applied with care. Her walk was brisk, efficient, almost automatic. But Marcus noticed it, how her eyes caught on him for a beat too long. She was polite to others, warm even. To him she offered nothing. Just that slight furrow between her brows, just that glance, just the space between greeting and silence. Marcus didn't react. He'd seen it before, in different forms and different places. Sometimes it was in the curve of a mouth, sometimes in a tightened shoulder, sometimes in the question that came a moment too late and with too much doubt. But he didn't move, he didn't speak, he waited. Emily reached his row, pausing only briefly before continuing past him with a neutral, "Welcome aboard." Her voice didn't quite match the tone she'd used 2 rows back. Marcus kept his gaze steady out the window. A few minutes later, as the last boarding call echoed through the cabin and overhead bins clicked shut, Marcus could feel the quiet shifting. The doors closed. The engines began their low rumble. Passengers buckled in. Flight attendants moved in rhythm, checking latches, counting seats, securing the galley. But Emily's path brought her back toward him again. She walked slower this time. Her eyes scanned the seating chart on her tablet. Then they shifted to him. There was hesitation in her steps, calculation, and then decision. She stopped beside his seat. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice professional but clipped. "Could I see your boarding pass again, please?" Marcus turned toward her. He blinked once, registering the question not with surprise but with measured calm. "Of course," he replied evenly. He reached into his inside pocket and handed her the folded slip of paper. Emily took it, glanced at it for longer than necessary, then looked back at him. "This is for first class," she said, not quite as a question. "Yes," Marcus replied. "That's where we are." A pause. She returned the ticket, her lips thin, her expression unreadable. "All right then," she said simply. Then she turned and walked away. But Marcus didn't look back at her. He returned his gaze to the clouds forming beyond the wing. Something had shifted in the air, something unspoken. He didn't know exactly what Emily Thompson would do next, but he knew this much: she had made up her mind about him, and she was about to make a mistake she couldn't take back. The aircraft had begun to taxi when Emily Thompson returned. She moved with purpose now, not the easy rhythm of service, but the clipped steps of someone preparing for confrontation. The quiet professionalism on her face had been replaced by a faint mask of discomfort, like she was forcing calm over something she wasn't quite sure how to name. Marcus felt her stop beside him again before he looked up. "Colonel Adams," she began, her voice polite but tighter now. "Would you mind stepping to the galley with me for a moment?" It wasn't a request. Marcus blinked once, then unbuckled his belt with measured ease. As he stood, he noticed several heads lift from their magazines and tablets. A man in 3C paused his podcast. A couple in the front row glanced at each other with raised eyebrows. No one said anything, but the shift in atmosphere was unmistakable. Emily led him toward the front of the cabin, past the curtain and into the galley. There, away from the passenger view, but not from earshot, she faced him directly. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, folding her arms, "but there appears to have been a mistake with your seating assignment." Marcus tilted his head slightly. "A mistake?" "Yes," she said. "Your name wasn't on the original manifest for first class. It looks like the system auto-upgraded your reservation in error. Unfortunately, that seat has now been reassigned." Her voice had grown cooler, her delivery practiced, like she'd rehearsed this excuse in her head all morning. Marcus didn't respond right away. He let the silence stretch just long enough for it to land. Then calmly he replied, "I booked this flight 3 weeks ago. First class, non-refundable, confirmed twice. My boarding pass matches the seat. The gate agent scanned me in without issue." Emily didn't blink. "Regardless, we'll need to reseat you in the economy section. We have an open row available. You'll still have plenty of space." Marcus stared at her for a moment, then nodded once. Understood. He didn't argue. He didn't resist. He simply turned, walked back through the curtain, and made his way down the aisle toward coach. The cabin felt quieter than before, subdued. A few passengers followed him with their eyes unsure whether to feel awkward or curious. One woman in 6A gave him a tight, apologetic smile. Another man looked away entirely. Marcus found the empty seat row 22A and placed his bag beneath the seat in front of him. He buckled in, straightened his jacket, and closed his eyes for a long breath. In that moment, he wasn't just a passenger. He was a symbol, though most of the cabin didn't realize it yet. Back at the front, Emily was trying to focus. She passed out drinks with a practiced smile, made polite small talk with a couple from Chicago, and offered a blanket to a cold businessman in 1D. But her eyes kept drifting to the rear of the plane. Every time she looked, she expected Marcus to be looking back, perhaps fuming, perhaps raising a hand to call another attendant. But he wasn't. He hadn't moved since sitting down. And that somehow was worse. He wasn't making a scene. He wasn't demanding anything. He was just waiting. In the galley, Emily pulled out her tablet again and tapped into the passenger list. She scrolled quickly, impatiently, until she found the name Adams Marcus D. Next to it, Priority Black. Status Executive Clearance. Her heart skipped once. She tapped for more info, then froze. Marcus D. Adams Ret, USAF Colonel Board Member, Stratus Air Holdings. There was a photo attached, a press release from a year ago. Stratus Air proudly announces veteran co-founder Colonel Marcus Adams to the board of directors following his retirement from active duty. Her stomach turned cold. She had moved a man not just wearing the uniform, not just a decorated officer, but a part owner of the airline, to the back of the plane. Without cause, no protocol, no incident, just a feeling, just an assumption. She locked the tablet and placed it down slowly as if afraid to make a sound. Her hands trembled. In the center of her chest, a dull ache was beginning to rise, the kind that warned of something irreversible, something you couldn't undo no matter how many times you said sorry. She walked down the aisle again, checking seatbelts. Passengers smiled at her. She smiled back. But inside, the edges of her confidence had already begun to fray. She could still feel the empty space where Marcus had sat in 2A. And even more, she could feel him in 22A, not speaking, not demanding, but knowing exactly what had happened. And who had done it. Back in economy, Marcus sat with his phone resting face down on his lap. He hadn't touched it since he sat down. Now quietly he reached for it. He opened a message thread with his assistant. Confirm follow-up with corporate, he typed, include timestamp, and begin draft statement for PR. He sent it, locked the phone, placed it back in his pocket, then returned to watching the clouds. The flight would be smooth. But for one member of the crew, the descent had already begun. The hum of the engines had settled into its mid-air rhythm. The seatbelt signs were off, carts were rolling, and the cabin had slipped into that familiar cruise phase lull. but beneath the surface tension still crackled. Quiet electric. Marcus sat in 22A calm but unmoving. His posture hadn't changed since takeoff. His arms rested gently on the armrests, his uniform still perfectly pressed, his eyes focused on a point just beyond the window glass. He looked like a man at peace, but his phone had already delivered the message. At 38,000 feet, power didn't need to raise its voice. In the front galley, Emily Thompson stood gripping the edge of the service cart, knuckles pale. She tried to focus on the task at hand, napkins, coffee, remembering who asked for sugar. But her thoughts kept circling back to one name, Marcus D. Adams. She had Googled him again, twice. It wasn't just the board seat, it was the articles, the speeches, the features in Forbes and Military Times. And one quote she couldn't unsee, pulled from a photo caption, "Colonel Adams never speaks loudly. He never needs to." Now every step she took down the aisle, she felt it. That pressure behind her ribs tightening with each glance over her shoulder toward the back of the plane. She tried not to look, but when she did, Marcus was still there, unmoving, watching the clouds, not watching her, which somehow made it worse. She wanted him to say something, to correct her, to challenge the decision she had made, but he hadn't. He had let her make the choice, and now he was letting her live in it. In row 5, a man in a navy blazer leaned toward his wife. "Something's off," he whispered. "Did you see how that soldier got moved?" His wife nodded slowly, lips pursed. "I thought I imagined it. No, that was a first-class seat." They didn't say more, but others had noticed too. The murmurs were spreading now, quiet but real, eyes drifting to the back, then to the front, then back again. Passengers might not have known exactly what had happened, but they knew enough to feel it, and Emily knew they felt it. She reached the galley and poured herself a cup of water, her hands no longer steady. When her tablet buzzed again, she nearly dropped it. A message had arrived from Michael Hayes, her onboard supervisor. "See me in Galley 1. Now." She felt her pulse spike, not just because of the tone, but because Michael wasn't even scheduled for her route. She checked again, confirmed it. He had boarded late, quietly. Corporate had sent him. At the same moment in economy, Marcus's phone lit up once more. "Hayes is aboard, proceeding to phase 2. He didn't reply. He simply tucked the phone away and closed his eyes for a moment. It wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability and timing. He didn't need to say another word. The system was already listening. At the front of the plane, Emily turned the corner into the forward galley. Michael was waiting, calm, clipboard in hand, eyes unreadable. "Emily," he said evenly, "we need to talk." She swallowed hard, and for the first time all flight she said nothing at all. The curtain closed behind Emily Thompson with a faint swish as she stepped into the forward galley. Michael Hayes stood waiting beside the service counter, clipboard in one hand, tablet in the other. He didn't smile. He didn't ask how service was going. His expression was unreadable, but his posture said everything. Something had shifted. "Emily," he said, voice calm but pointed. "You've been requested." She blinked. "Requested?" Michael handed her the tablet. A new message glowed on the screen. "Executive Office has flagged an incident involving first-class seating reassignment. Immediate debrief required. Prepare to speak directly with Captain Evans. Operations Control." Emily felt her stomach twist. She tried to form words, but her mouth was dry. "I didn't," she began. Michael held up a hand. "You'll have your chance. But first, the captain needs to hear your version. He's waiting." Captain Robert Evans was seated in the cockpit, headset draped over one ear when Emily entered. The glow of screens lit his face from below, but it was the look in his eyes that stole her breath. It wasn't anger. It was focus. "Close the door," he said. She obeyed. "You reassigned Colonel Marcus Adams?" he asked, skipping preamble. She nodded slowly. "I didn't know who he was." Evans studied her. "That's not the problem." Emily swallowed hard. "Then what is—" He leaned forward. "You didn't need to know who he was. All you needed to do was look at his ticket, confirm his seat. Let him fly." Her mouth parted, but no words came out. Evans continued. "You made a decision based on something else, and now the executive office is involved. I've already received notice. Marcus has filed a formal complaint, and PR is drafting a response before we even land." The weight of it crashed down all at once. Her legs felt hollow. Evans tapped his console, pulled up a message from HQ, and turned it toward her. "Marcus D. Adams, majority stakeholder. Reported incident. In-flight reassignment without cause. Status escalated to board review." Emily stared at it, barely breathing. "I didn't intend—" No one intends this, Evans' cut-in voice soft but firm. But it happened, and now we deal with it. He picked up the intercom receiver. "I'll have to make an announcement," he said. She blinked, startled. What kind of announcement? Evans didn't answer. He pressed the PA button. The speaker crackled over the quiet cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I want to thank you for your patience. At this time, we are holding briefly at cruising altitude while we coordinate with ground operations." In the cabin, heads lifted. Phones were raised, subtle but deliberate. Passengers glanced at one another. They could feel it. Something was coming. Back in 22A, Marcus opened his eyes. He didn't look surprised. He simply sat up straighter, adjusted the crease of his uniform, and waited. His assistant had already confirmed what was waiting at the gate. 10 minutes later, Michael Hayes walked down the aisle toward Marcus. The entire cabin watched him. "Colonel Adams," Michael said with a quiet nod, "we're prepared for your transfer to the lounge immediately upon arrival. Mr. Carter from the board is awaiting your debrief. And," he hesitated, "Emily Thompson has been relieved of her duties for the remainder of the flight. She will be escorted to ground operations." Marcus nodded once. Understood. He didn't gloat, didn't smirk. He simply stood. And with that simple gesture, without a raised voice or a single dramatic word, he reclaimed every ounce of dignity that had been taken from him. In the forward galley, Emily sat alone. Her ID badge sat on the counter beside her, stripped, silent, still. Her headset was gone, her tablet locked out. She was no longer a part of the cabin. She was now the lesson. As the plane began its descent, a quiet swept through the aircraft. Marcus remained seated, calm, present. Passengers didn't say much, but their glances said enough. And Emily. She didn't speak again for the rest of the flight. She just watched the clouds pass by one after another, each one dragging her a little further from the woman she thought she was, and closer to the reality she had refused to see. The landing was smooth, barely a bump, but inside the cabin the tension had not eased with altitude. Passengers sat straighter in their seats. They weren't fumbling for carry-ons or chatting about rental cars. They were watching, waiting. Because this wasn't just the end of a flight, this was the start of something larger. The wheels touched down at Newark Liberty, and a subtle shift passed through the aircraft, like the moment before a verdict is read. In the forward galley, Emily Thompson sat frozen. Her badge lay in her lap. Her hands were still trembling from the captain's message. Her headset had been removed. Her access tablet had been remotely logged out. Corporate had locked her credentials the moment the plane crossed into New Jersey airspace. Now the silence inside her was deafening. No passengers to serve, no crew to direct. She wasn't flight staff anymore. She was the incident. Outside at Gate 23B, a black SUV idled on the tarmac. Inside sat Mr. Carter, a senior board member of Stratus Air. He had arrived 30 minutes before touchdown. With him were 2 corporate investigators and a representative from public affairs. They weren't there for Marcus. They were there because Marcus had pressed send. One message, one name, one incident, now viral. Somewhere near row 4, a young woman refreshed her feed and gasped. A video had just gone live. It showed Marcus standing at the front of the plane in uniform being asked to step into the galley by a flight attendant. No shouting, no confrontation, just a black man in uniform being moved. The caption read, "Veteran relocated from first class to coach. Turns out he owns the airline. Stratus Air, bias in the sky, respect uniform." The post already had 58,000 views. 10 rows back, a teenage boy whispered, "Wait, that was him." Someone else pulled out their phone. Passengers exchanged glances. The silence shifted into whispers. Emily could hear it all from the galley. In the rear, Marcus remained seated. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't gloating. He just waited. He knew how fast these things moved now. He knew how power didn't always show up in a boardroom. Sometimes it showed up in timing, in patience, in letting people write their own stories before showing them who they'd written off. As the plane came to a full stop, Captain Evans made the final announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Newark. For those disembarking, we ask for your patience as a few passengers are assisted off the aircraft first." That was code. Everyone knew it. Phones lifted, eyes shifted. And as Marcus stood, the entire front half of the plane tracked his every move. He adjusted his coat, took his bag from under the seat, and nodded once to the passenger beside him who whispered, "Thank you for your service." Marcus didn't speak. He just walked forward. Michael Hayes met him at the front. "This way, sir," he said. Emily didn't meet his eyes as he passed, but Marcus paused beside her just long enough for her to feel it. He didn't look down at her. He didn't speak. but his presence, his silence, said everything. Then he was gone, off the plane, into the waiting SUV, and into the next phase of the fallout. By the time Emily exited, most passengers were already off, but the eyes that remained were sharper now, less confused, more aware. She didn't wear her name tag. She didn't walk with confidence. She was flanked by two Stratus representatives who offered no warmth, only logistics. "This way, Ms. Thompson. Please follow us to the operations room." Inside the terminal, CNN and NBC local affiliates were already on site. They didn't know her name yet, but they would. The PR team was already preparing a statement: Stratus Air does not tolerate bias in any form. We are conducting a full review of the incident involving board member Colonel Marcus Adams and are committed to accountability at every level. It was clean, it was corporate, it was fast. But it wasn't enough to stop what was coming. That night the story was everywhere. Cable news, social media, late-night shows. A still image of Marcus seated in uniform and coach became a symbol of dignity, of restraint, of what it looked like when someone carried real power without ever having to raise their voice. Commentators debated. Others apologized on behalf of the system. But Marcus, he didn't issue a statement. He didn't post a tweet. He simply met with the board behind closed doors the next morning. And when asked what should happen to the employee involved, he gave a simple answer: let her face the weight of the assumptions she carried. Then give her the tools to never carry them again. The boardroom on the 26th floor of Stratus Air headquarters was built for prestige. Glass walls, polished oak, and a view of the skyline that exuded control. But inside that morning, the air was tight. Marcus Adams sat at the head of the table, not in uniform today. Charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, no tie, just presence. Calm, centered, immovable. Around him, the legal team, HR executives, and CEO Alan Prescott weighted papers, stacked files opened. A formal review had begun. A printed document lay in front of Marcus: Internal Report Incident A442, First-Class Seating Displacement. The header included the name Emily Thompson. He hadn't read it. He didn't need to. He remembered every detail. Across town, in a neutral corporate room with blank walls and soft lighting, Emily sat alone. Her phone was off. Her employee badge had been surrendered. A company-provided liaison sat outside the door waiting for HR to finish internal deliberations. She had been interviewed for over 2 hours. They hadn't yelled. They didn't accuse. They simply laid out the facts. Boarding pass confirmed. Manifest accurate. No reported passenger conflict. No seating issue logged in the system. One decision. Unilateral. Unjustified. A procedural overstep, they called it in the paperwork. But everyone in the room knew what it really was. Back in the boardroom, Marcus listened as Alan Prescott leaned forward. "We want to be transparent," Alan said. "The board is unified in its belief that this incident reflects a systemic issue, not just an individual mistake." Marcus gave a slight nod. Alan continued. "Our recommendation is formal disciplinary action, temporary suspension, and mandated DEI retraining. We also propose that Ms. Thompson submit a formal apology and participate in a company-wide training series, as both learner and example." All eyes turned to Marcus. He folded his hands. "Do I have the authority to override the recommendation?" "Yes," said the legal officer. "You can call for termination." Marcus paused. Then he shook his head once. "She doesn't need to be fired." A long silence followed. "But she does need to understand that what she did wasn't a clerical error. It was an act of exclusion. And exclusion, especially when quiet, polite, and systemic, is the most dangerous kind." No one spoke. So Marcus finished the thought. "I want her reinstated, but only after she's completed retraining, and only after she faces the people she hurt, openly." 3 days later, Emily walked into a modest room in the same building. It wasn't a courtroom, but it felt like one. Marcus was already there, seated alone at a long table. This time he wore no title, just presence. Emily approached slowly, her steps cautious. She sat down across from him. "I want to say I'm sorry," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I made a decision based on assumption, based on how you looked. I saw the uniform and thought, you didn't belong there. I didn't think. I just acted." Marcus didn't blink. "You're not the first person to assume that. You won't be the last." He leaned forward. "But now that you know who I am, does the apology feel different?" Emily's eyes flickered. "Yes," she admitted, "but I hate that it does." He nodded. "I don't want your guilt," he said. "I want your growth." The meeting lasted 20 minutes. He didn't berate her. He didn't demand. He just made sure she left the room understanding something she'd never forget, that the cost of assumption is trust. And once broken, it doesn't come back easily. A week later, Stratus Air issued an internal memo. As part of our renewed commitment to equity and accountability, we're launching the One Standard initiative, led by board member Marcus Adams and supported by cross-functional leadership. The goal: no passenger should ever be made to feel they don't belong, anywhere. Below that statement in smaller font was a single quote from Marcus: "Power isn't what you say, it's what you choose not to ignore." The airport was quieter now. Midday light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Stratus Air Executive Lounge, casting soft reflections across polished tile and clean leather seats. The noise of morning travel had faded, leaving only the occasional page over the intercom and the distant roll of suitcase wheels. Marcus Adams sat by the window, a cup of black coffee cooling in his hand, untouched. He wasn't in uniform today. No insignia, no press entourage. Just a man in a simple gray suit watching planes lift into the sky. Planes he helped build, routes he helped establish, a company he helped shape. He didn't need a spotlight. He needed space to think. Behind him, his phone buzzed once. A message from corporate PR stories cooled. Positive sentiment outweighs negative. Internal morale strong. Press moving on. He read it once, then turned the screen off. He hadn't spoken publicly. Not in interviews. Not in statements. He didn't need to. Silence, when chosen, could carry more power than 1,000 perfect words. Across the city, Emily Thompson returned to work. Her new badge bore a different color, a temporary indicator of probationary status. She wore it without shame. She didn't walk like she used to. Gone was the bounce, the automatic smile, the quiet self-assurance. She walked slower now, watched more, listened harder. Her training was complete. Her apology had been accepted. But what stayed with her wasn't the punishment. It was the look in Marcus's eyes when he asked, "Would you have done the same to someone who looked like you?" She hadn't answered then, but the question never left. Her first flight back was uneventful. Routine greetings, standard service, passengers she didn't know and who didn't know her. Yet at every step she found herself looking longer, checking twice, pausing before deciding, not out of fear, but out of care. Because now she understood the weight of a single glance, of one unchecked assumption, of how easily respect could be withheld without a word. Later that month, during a company-wide town hall, Marcus was invited to speak. He stood in front of hundreds of employees in person, and thousands more watching virtually. He wore no suit, no uniform, just a navy shirt and a calm voice. He told no dramatic story. He gave no angry speech. He simply said, "I wasn't angry that day. I was disappointed, not because someone failed to recognize me, but because someone assumed I didn't belong before I even sat down." Then he paused. Let the silence stretch. "I've worn a uniform for most of my life, but no uniform, not military, not corporate, can protect you from assumption. Only culture can do that. And culture starts with people, with the choices we make when no one's watching." The room was still. No applause, just reflection. And that was enough. Weeks passed, the headlines faded, but the changes stayed. New training modules, clearer escalation procedures, a company-wide review of unconscious bias policy, and one new requirement: every new hire would watch a video titled Row 2A. It didn't name names, it didn't show faces, it just told a story about a seat, a soldier, and a silence that changed an airline. One evening, Marcus sat on his apartment balcony, city lights flickering beyond the rail. He sipped a fresh cup of coffee. Finally hot, finally quiet. His assistant had texted earlier, "Want to post something?" "Just a closing thought," Marcus replied with one line: "Power without empathy is fragile, and silence, when held with dignity, can shatter it all." He never hit post, but the message stayed with him, and maybe that was enough. She never expected it. One quiet man, one wrong assumption, and a moment that changed her career forever. Because sometimes justice doesn't shout, it simply shows up, in silence, in patience, and in power that doesn't need to announce itself. If this story left you thinking, tell us what part hit you the hardest in the comments below. And if you want more stories that uncover truth through dignity, hit subscribe and turn on the bell, because we're just getting started.